So the next section is a total obsession of mine. I am a brand freak. I love good brands. And what I find is that when we work in this industry around technology and digital health and healthcare and medical, brand sometimes gets left off to the side of the road. And it's because we're so involved in trying to produce great results that sometimes we don't think about how the consumers are visualizing our product, how they're reaching us, and ultimately we really want to help you guys with this. So honestly, I can't say that we didn't bring in the best for you, because we absolutely did. Saatchi Saatchi, I've known this, Ned's looking at me, but I have known this brand from when I used to live in LA. I remember going to drive by the offices thinking, I'm gonna go work for Saatchi Saatchi someday. So now I don't. But with that said, I want to introduce you Ned Russell, who is the group managing director for I don't know how new it is. I think it's within the last year. We're still really building it, but it's around health and wellness. So this couldn't fit more smack dab in what we're talking about here. So a little fun fact about Ned: he's a volunteer fireman in his hometown of Southport, Connecticut. So if a fire breaks out during this conference, he's going to have to head to Lindenberg and fly home to help the others to put it out. Let's hope it doesn't happen in the next 30 minutes. And if we could have the lights turned down, please, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's nice to see everyone. I have to apologize at the outset. I had a meeting last week with our parent, Publicis, and all I got out of my trip to Paris was this nasty cold, so I hope that you'll bear with me. And I'd also like to, before I start, thank Jill and Rafi and the sponsors and everybody who put this together. And I thought last night was really nice, so give these guys a hand. Thank you very much. Now, I was excited about speaking today until I got the agenda. And I found that I was speaking right before lunch on a Friday, which is a slot that I would call the breakaway slot, because if I were in the audience, this is when I might step out of the room and, make a phone call, right? So I'm sitting at my laptop, and I'm getting very concerned about this, and I look up, and there I see a reference material that I turn to all the time when stuff like this comes up. You guys know this book? All right. Now, since this book came out like 14 years ago, I go to it constantly, right? So I think, Jesus, I'm in the breakaway spot. I got to do something here. So I start paging through. And, how to escape from quicksand. Good to know, but this actually is not going to help. And I keep going, and how to land a plane. Interesting, I don't really think I'm going to need that either. And then I turn a few more pages, and what would you know but how to survive being between a digital health crowd and lunch, right? And there's like really good stuff here, like don't turn and run, I like that. Be brief, no one is really listening, right? So that sets me off personally. I'm like, okay, I'm going to write something that's going to be like brief and engaging, and we're going to have everyone in on this, right? And then I look at the agenda again, and I see that after lunch is the John Scully panel. So now I'm in a full-scale like panic attack, right? And I page a few more pages in, and what do I find? How to survive being between a digital health crowd, lunch, and John Scully. Right, relax, wear protective gear. So it's all here. We're ready to go. Actually, in doing this, it's funny because even at Saatchi, we wish there was a worst-case scenario handbook for branding, because we certainly get presented with a lot of opportunities from prospective clients where you wish you could reference them to one. And maybe that's going to be my next thing. But when I got the title from Jill, I found that to be interesting, because Got Brand is obviously lifted off of a very valuable brand itself. And implicit in this is that brand is not something that's bestowed. And it's most definitely not. And brands are living, active things, and you nurture them and you raise them. It's kind of like a kid or a crop. And And if you take care of it, it in turn takes care of you. And in fact, your brand may be your primary value amplifier to many of you for what your business here. So the Saatchi and Saatchi guy is not here to give us a rah-rah speech about why brands are good. And we're not here to talk about our best advertising work or digital channels, because everyone should know that when we reference brands, we're referencing something that's a lot bigger than just creative work, but it's really something that fuels the essence of your company, your culture, your hiring, your R&D, your investments. And I'm not here to tell you that you should hire Saatchi to take your brand to the highest level, but I got a lot of business cards, so if anybody wants to talk later, obviously we can. But I've actually followed the instructions given to me by the conference organizers about what a successful brand ought to look like and how it can create additional value. And added value is what I would like everyone in the audience to take away from this presentation as to what happens if you manage a brand well. So we're going to have some fun in the next 20 minutes or so. And I want to start by going to a real-life example about how brands create additional value. Now, before Saatchi, I was in another kind of wellness business. I ran marketing for the Las Vegas Sands Corporation. And my title was Vice President of Brand Marketing, which basically meant I did everything except the casinos. So if anyone's looking for a tip for Sunday's Spurs Heat game, I can't help them out. But I'll tell you this, I grew up working with clients like Johnson & Johnson, Coke, Unilever, Hershey's, and I'll put the Sands people at the top of the list of people who know how to extract value and manage them from brands. So here's the story. In 2008, shortly after I started, the Sands was in the process of building a residential tower. Now, in the background is the Venetian Hotel. In the foreground, on the left, is my favorite, the Palazzo. And in the middle is this tower, right? And I'm called to this meeting because there were two financial guys, statisticians, who came out from under the sink in their second-level basement office. And they said something that I should have, as the marketing guy, have come up with, but since I had only been there about 2 weeks, I got a break. And what they said was, if we put a brand on this, we could price it at $50 more a square foot. And they had done work to demonstrate that this was right. Now, all of you have been to Las Vegas. You know the scale of these buildings. The footprint of that tower is basically 80,000 square feet. It's a 50-story tower. So do the math, and that's an incremental value just on a brand of about $200 million to the Sands. Now, at this time, we were working with Starwood on properties in Macau. And so at the end of our meeting, we call Starwood up. And the brand that we wanted was St. Regis. So we explained what the situation is and how we'd like to price it and the whole bit. And Starwood basically says, hey, look, thanks for calling. It's early 2008. We don't think the economy looks that great. We don't want to have the brand attached to a failure. No, not right now. So day two, we come all back into the office, and we're not really people who give up easy, right? And so we talk about this. And at the end of that meeting, the Sands management comes forward, and they say, look, call him back. Tell him that we'll write him a check today. We'll put it in the mail tonight for a big figure, mid-8 figures. And we'll follow their brand guidelines to the letter. So call number 2 goes to Starwood. We go home that night. The next day, we all come in. Starwood calls, call number 3, deal. Send us the check, follow the brand guidelines, you're on your way. Now, that night, I am sure, in White Plains, New York, there was champagne being popped, and they're saying, we took 3 phone calls from these crazy guys in Las Vegas, and we're getting this big check. I will tell you that that night in Las Vegas, there were celebrations because they were saying, look, we just made 3 phone calls, and we've increased the value of this tower by like $150 million. Now, today, that tower sits empty. It's draped. And the reason it is that in 2009, because of the financial crisis, the Sands was forced to stop working on it. It will be back. It's going to come back. Count on it. And when they do, the value of what they put into that is going to be far greater than what they had even imagined back in 2008 and 2009. And it's because they saw the value of what brand would add to that particular property. Now, I'm sure that for everybody here, you can step back and go, yeah, it's great, Ned, but you're talking about St. Regis, it's luxury goods. I'm in healthcare, and this is like digital technology. Well, I have to beg to differ there, because let's take a look at Millward Brown, the global research company's brand's top 100 list. And in the top 10 of those, 4 are technology companies. If we broaden our definition to include brands like telecoms, who are clearly also in your space, then we're dealing with 6 of the top 10, who are emerging or direct competitors to many of you for what you want to get into. So our universe and the brands that you have to compete against are among the most valuable in the world today. So branding should be at the center of what you're looking to do. Now, here's an example from our own world. We've got a wonderful client up the road, Allergan. And we recently began working with them on a migraine therapy called Levodex. What you see here are analyst projections for what Levodex sales should be. And this was a chart that we used in our original presentation for the business. These are not Allergan numbers. This is our chart. And what we did is, in speaking to them about the programs that we were proposing, we did the math and we quantified, as we do with all of our clients, in a very direct way, what we thought the economic impact of the branding would be. And what we saw, and we could tie back to, was a lift which over 4 years was equaling about $150 million. And that's a lift just out of doing it better. There's marketing that's already baked into what's the analyst projections, right? It's not like they're not spending, and it's a very good therapy. It's a very good drug. So we know it's going to be successful. However, we know if we do certain things right, there ought to be an added benefit for them. There is one other very, very important part about branding that I want to talk about early, and it may seem oxymoronic, but it's an exit strategy. Now, what I mean by an exit strategy is it's not the ticket to ride for a digital health entrepreneur that says, how do I cash out of this quickly, get rich, and move on to the next thing? Although it could be. What I'm really talking about is how you have a plan to exit whatever cycle you're in as a brand and move on to the next. It's something that all great brands do well. And it's never too early to start thinking about your exit strategy. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, because we could fill up a lot more than 20 minutes by talking about how you create really good brands. But I'm going to bet that virtually everybody in the room has already read how you create a really good brand. I'd like to see a show of hands. Who read the Isaacson biography of Steve Jobs? All right. Well, I'll give you some more notes for the others. You'll remember, for those who read it, that Mike Marcullo was somebody involved with the Apple venture very early on. And he had a huge impact on Jobs and the entire enterprise. And it was about marketing, really, in particular. In the late 1970s, Marcullo writes a one-pager. I repeat, this is a one-pager. Called the Apple Marketing Philosophy. And it's not revolutionary. There's nothing in it that's particularly unique, or is a secret sauce to Apple. But what I find interesting about it are 2 things. The first is it had a clarity and a brevity in addressing the virtues of creating a valuable brand. And the second thing is that very on, this particular enterprise long before it became the Apple that was #1 on that Millward Brown list, had said that brand was going to be very much front and center to how they developed their business. And remember, in the late 1970s, brand was nowhere near what technology companies were really doing. It was the domain of consumer goods companies, right? So Marculla's document had 3 things that he identified that good brands have to do and that Apple needed to do. The first was empathy. So you can't just know your consumer, you have to understand them. And Marculla's goal was, we are going to understand our consumer better than anyone else. The second was focus. If we were to lay out a value for creating great brands, I would say focus might be one of the most important. And it never ceases to amaze me how marketers who get paid a lot of money and spend millions of their shareholders' dollars can't bring themselves to focus. Eliminate all of the unimportant opportunities. I mean, even the wording of that is brilliant, because it's not that there aren't opportunities out there, it's that decisions have to be made about which ones will be important and which ones will be unimportant. The third one might not be the most graceful language, but it's something that Apple, I think, has had a big impact on. And that is that people do form an opinion about a company or a product based upon the signals it conveys. They do judge a book by its cover. And I believe that those 3 things, knowing your customer, letting go of the unimportant opportunities and focusing on what's important, and then making sure that you realize whatever signal you send out through whatever channel reinforces your equity and creates a higher value, are at the core of how really valuable brands get developed. Now, here's the part of the presentation where you think the Saatchi and Saatchi guy is going to go and tell you what their secret sauce is and how we get it all done. But the question was asked, what's a branding format? And our branding format would basically be this. Now, we do have a more standard format, but you'd have to pay us for me to show it to you in this presentation. But a blank page is seriously how our most talented people start any briefing process. No matter what their history of success, no matter their familiarity with the brand in the health or well-being area, the therapeutic area, they really start every project as a blank page, because there's no substitute for coming in to a situation in a position where you're unencumbered by knowledge, in effect. And through discovery, listening to the customer, observing the obvious of the market, and having the strategic business decision as to where you want to recommend that your clients place their chips, to use Vegas language, you can create the greatest economic return. And that's how our pros do it. The other thing is simplicity. This line is a universal truth about how great brands operate. This is different than the focus line in Marculla's thing, because that was about opportunities you spend your time on and those that you don't. Here, the point is different. Great brands tell their value proposition simply and consistently, and even in healthcare. Here's one that we've created at Saatchi Wellness. Nexium followed Prilosec into the market. There was no reason for this to be successful, really. Its predecessor had gone over the counter. It did have an indication about healing. The healing purple pill is something that is now the #2 selling RX item in the US, which should be by now the #1. Humira is also represented by Wellness. And it has done so well that last year, it started running for the first time in the post-fair balance era, which means all that stuff that follows and the warnings and any kind of a drug, a 15-second commercial. First time the FDA had approved one. And that was because of the strength of that equity. So not only in 2011, when 2/3 of that market went over the counter, did Nexium hold its sales, which was an impact of billions of dollars to AstraZeneca. The strength of the equity allowed them to run shorter units, which increased their margin quite substantially. So the things that make a strong brand are really consistent in any space. The first is intimate knowledge of, relationship with, and respect for the customer. And you can never lose sight of that respect thing. It's very, very, very important. Second, the most valuable brands have an unbending promise. This is the essence of what your brand is to your customer, and it has to be recognized as such. And if you want to hear a good branding guy, someday, I'm going to go back to Las Vegas, listen to a Steve Wynn earnings call. And he'll always say the same line, and I can't do it in the Wynn voice, but he talks like that. And he'll say, the reason that Las Vegas is successful is that for all these years, its promise has been there's a party going on here 24/7, 52 weeks a year. And as long as we stay true to that promise, there will always be good business here for somebody. I'm not going to get into the last part of that. Third, the great brands have a relevance with their consumer. They know their relevance, though, to their time. Any of you who are old enough to remember the great Drivers Wanted stuff for Volkswagen will know that it was more than a car campaign then. It was sort of a statement about what the times were. And around 1998, the New Yorker ran a cartoon that was great, and there's a guy in his therapist's office, and the guy saying to the therapist, the only two people who understand me are you and the marketing guy from VW. And that was the position that VW held at that time. And finally, great brands do have a personality, and it's a real personality. It's unique, it's got, like people, quirks, and they stay with it, they manage that. Now, for the purpose of what we're talking about here with you guys today, I say that branding is a little bit different in this way. Quality of offering is a critical component of creating brands in the healthcare technology space. The utility of what most of you create has a real and impactful resonance on the value of your brand. Now, the organizers asked me to call out some brands that at Saatchi we think are doing a good job. So if you just grant me that the N is less than 10 in terms of our survey here are a few. We think that wearable technology is clearly where it's going. You've heard it in the last 2 days here. And I first heard James Park of Fitbit speak at CES, I think 2 years ago. And I thought they really know where they're going. And at that time, they were already on the top 10 list of Amazon health and fitness devices. I mean, they really have it going. The second one you might find a little bit odd, and I think it's been talked about here, but Happy Fork. We're kind of giving them a break because it's a little early for something that's about 6 months old to be getting brand accolades. But all of the math is there. The understanding of the customer, the unbending promise, a relevance with their times, a clear personality. We think that Happy Fork is a really interesting one to look at. Another one is an app would be Gate Guru. Now, I don't know how many of you use Gate Guru. It's great. In my mind, and it was originally launched as something that would help you find healthier fares when you're traveling through airports, but now it's helping with what it calls its mission being to help travelers through the indignity of travel, which we all know what that's about. But if you're doing it right, what happens is people start talking about you, and you get picked up by, like, the New York Times. And that's a very good thing, which keeps your brand going. I don't believe that a brand can ever develop a plan for the ages. Nobody does. The world's a little more challenging than that. But I do think that really strong brands know how to reinvent themselves with the times. And this might be one of the strongest tests of them all, because certainly the world is littered with dead brands that are dead because they wouldn't reinvent themselves. Now, there are two that have reinvented themselves in the health space I wanted to call out quickly. Nike and Fuel Band. I mean, Nike does it so well, but I'll give you a quick story on this one that's a personal one. I call it the Spency test. I've got a 9-year-old boy named Spencer. He had just finished 3rd grade, and this kid was like, as of November, I gotta have a Fuel Band, gotta have a Fuel Band. You know what that's about. He knew what the cost was. It had to be Nike. He knew what the color it was. You know, black ice, Dad. It's gotta be black ice. And he was he was persistent about it, but the reason why is there was an attachment there that was bigger than what the device was. It was to the brand. The other one that would be interesting for, I think, people here to follow is the Hospital for Special Surgery. Lou Shapiro is the CEO. He's someone who I met about 2 years ago. And the hospital is about 150, 160 years old. And it's a unique hospital, but what it's doing in using digital technology to extend its reach is really quite interesting. So in your space, strong brand married to the utility of a strong product offering is really what you need to have. But let me make it a little bit simpler. If you want to know whether or not you've got brand, you've got to ask yourself one simple question. Does your offerings, your communication, every signal and how your company acts, and ultimately your product marry the values you want to offer and stay true to? And are you offering a utility that will deliver a meaningful benefit to your customer? If you've got to BS your way through this, you probably don't have brand, and it's not really going to help drive your business. So, to get brand, remember that you're dealing with what may be your number one value multiplier. Treat it that way. If you're in a position of management in the company, or you have a significant financial interest, you must be a part of that conversation. But also, find a way to be a part of the process as well, because the people who are tasked with developing your brand will appreciate that. No one bats 1,000 in the brand game. Everybody at some point makes a wrong move. So learn from your brilliant failures and try not to make it happen all the time, but you have to be very clear when you see brands that learn from their mistakes. You can tell right away, and try to create a culture where a mistake is a badge. It's not a stain, because the great ones really do learn from it. I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm going to tell you that there aren't any shortcuts. The people who are the best do the basics extremely well, and they may have other people do the diligence for them, but they're very familiar with what are the standards that you need to know to make a decision. And I was watching the French Open a couple of weeks ago, and McEnroe was talking about Djokovic, and he was talking about some kid that Djokovic was like beating up on, and he was saying this kid is like a top 20 player. He will be a top 10 player by the end of the year, but this is what he needs to learn. He said this kid needs to know that, like Djokovic, he's got to learn to love training to win more than he loves to win. And that's when he becomes a top 10 player. The same is true in branding in terms of doing the basics. Lastly, we all do this because it stirs a passion. I can tell you that in the agency business, you don't do this because you get paid a lot of money, but you do it because you enjoy it. So if you want brand, believe in it, and create something that you think is going to have an impact that will last longer than your time here, but for many generations to come. This was a lot of fun to write, by the way, so thank you, and I'd like to open this up for questions.
Hi. Great presentation. I really enjoyed the first part. In developing a brand and going through that proper process, I totally agree with you. Often as a small startup or some of the smaller companies, there's a lot of, it often costs a lot to actually do that. And you said there's no shortcuts. So how do you assure that you get the true value out of the investment in creating that? And how can you do that if you've got a shoestring budget?
I think it's a really good question, because I think that the world is flat, right? And I think that it's become flat. And there are ways that you can get the data that you need, and you can also, by trolling through bloggers, in social sites, you can pick up a lot that will give you true consumer insight. And most of the data, at least in sort of big macro trends, you can also find online. So I think that the diligence that's needed to do the basics, my position would be the cost is actually going down. And it's funny because a lot of our best work is coming from things that aren't things that, we're investing 5 or 6 figures to start up for our clients. More hand to hand.
Can you define brand for us?
Sure. Brand is the person that you create around your service or product. So it's all of that. It is, what is it named? How does it look? What are its core attributes? What are the virtues of that brand? And that's exactly how you've got to look at it. You create the person. I didn't say persona, because a persona is something that you come into and then you leave. It's not really you. It's what is that thing? Great. Thank you.